Hello, good evening, and welcome back. So, the US is to hold funding to the World Health Organization, says Trump. And, yeah, so Trump says, hold fund to World Health Organization, US follows, because, of course they do, it's actually making sense. But, while we're on the subject of funding, some good news, why not? That you might have heard of the fundraiser led by a 99-year-old war veteran, Captain Tom Moore, who was aiming to raise £1,000 by walking around his home with his stroller 100 times, and they've beaten that by a substantial margin and been able to raise £7 million. So, hey, a charity is doing its work, jolly good, and £7 million is a heck of a lot of money, as you can see by these wonderful people here. So, given £7 million is quite a lot, how much is the NHS annual budget? Well, it's £134 billion. So, obviously, well done, Captain. But compared to a year, how long did it take for them to get through that £7 million? Half an hour. It takes them half an hour. But people are sending him birthday cards for his 100th birthday at the end of April. So, hey, long life to you. But yes, more funding. Coronavirus insurance firms ordered to pay out or explain. So they're basically saying, well, we weren't prepared for a pandemic. And some did say that if there's a pandemic except for flu, like SARS, then we won't be paying out. So fair enough. Others just have basic insurance to not cover this kind of disease, in which case, fair enough. But some actually did include contagious diseases. And if they had to shut down because of the contagious diseases, then, of course, they would get paid for it because of that. But some insurers, like Hiscox, are saying, well, no, we can't do that because we don't have enough money. In which case, well, that's not our problem. That's your problem. That's it. So as they say, Mr. Waller admitted that following conversations with insurers, it was clear that most businesses' interruption policies held by small and medium-sized businesses only had basic cover which did not include pandemics, and therefore insurers had no obligation to pay out in relation to COVID-19. So, yes, fair enough. But for the ones that do, and they're trying to say, well, no, because, hey, when we said contagious diseases, we meant like Legionnaires, something that's within a mile. So, well, it doesn't say that, so you're paying out. And if you can't afford it, then that's not on us, that's on yours. In fact, Hiscox's policy document says that it will cover financial losses for businesses which are unable to use their premises following an occurrence of any human infectious or human contagious disease, an outbreak of which must be notified to local authority. The one exception I would say to them here is that if the government is causing people to close, and it isn't because of their own volition, essentially, then is that not for the government saying that you're not allowed to stay open, at which point, seeing as this is unprecedented, is that not then for the government to say, well, if we've screwed you over, then we have to help you out as well, and we're going to take responsibility for our own actions, and therefore help out. In which case, it isn't down to the insurers anyway. But if it isn't, then when do they step in? When the government isn't responsible, put simply. So that would all make sense. So you can see it from both sides here, and I'm going to be a fence sitter about this to say that the private companies, they have to honour their agreements, but if the government is intervening so that this can't happen and you can't have business as usual, then if the business is kind of business as usual, then why should the insurance companies have to have business as usual? But the main story, US to hold funding to World Health Organization, says Trump, and it is about time. The World Health Organization, which is, of course, now led by the Ethiopian gentleman who is a so-called doctor. His doctorate is what it is. It's a PhD. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. He, of course, has been with the backing of China for quite a while, and he's been leader for 2.5 years, I believe, taking over from Margaret Chan. And the BBC is, of course, singing his praises, saying, oh, it must be a difficult job, he's doing such a good job. And unfortunately, no. When there was a cholera outbreak in Ethiopia, he said, oh, it's just watery diarrhea. It's like, yes, that is a symptom, but it's definitely not nearly the same as actually cholera. And he's just been playing to China the whole time, of course, because, hey, that's where you get that's the country which could cut off your funding the most. They don't provide as much funding as the US because they fund about 10% instead of about 25%. We'll get to the exact figures soon. But Trump is saying, seeing as the World Health Organization has become what Japan has called the Chinese Health Organization, but better is the CCP health organization, seeing as they're playing to them, when Taiwan, of course, spoke out saying, hey, we realized that there was a problem from China, and therefore we closed our borders, as of course you would expect. Then you go, okay, well then we should listen to Taiwan, seeing as they know what they're doing. But of course they didn't, because that would go against the CCP, and therefore they discarded what Taiwan said. As I'm sure you've seen with the interview of the gentleman who's now impossible to find because he's been scrubbed from the World Health Organization website, that when asked about Taiwan, say, oh no, I didn't hear that. Okay, let's ask again. Let's skip over to a new one. Now let's ask about Taiwan again. Hangs up. Okay, let's call back. Let's try and ask about Taiwan again. This was from a Hong Kong news reporter, a journalist. When well, we've already spoken about China. So, oh, okay, cool. So you're playing the party line then to support China. As we've seen in the press briefings as well, where there have been plans to say they're from Hong Kong because they're from Phoenix, which is a private company, except it's operates predominantly in Shanghai, I believe. And therefore, no, seeing as it has close relation with China, of course, all of their businesses are all agreed upon by the CCP. The same with the gentleman who was supposed to be from Taiwan, but also based from Shanghai. So no, it is just China trying to get into the press briefings as well to spread their propaganda around. So seeing as the World Health Organization, the Chinese Health Organization, has been agreeing with China and saying, oh, they're doing such a good job, and America is evil, and when China was saying, oh, this is basically an American virus, the World Health Organization said nothing, then you can see where their allegiances really lie, which is a bit peculiar, seeing as, okay, actual numbers here. The US is the biggest single funder, which is not a 15% of its total budget, it says, with $400 million, whereas China's contribution was almost $76 million, so about a fifth, so 3% then, they are. So 15 to 3%, so you would have thought, well, then why are they paying so much? Or why are they paying so much attention to China? Especially considering that America, of course, has its payments out to the rest of the world for healthcare, because they're the main ones that are developing the medicine, and of course for protection through NATO. So in a response to this, then Trump was saying, well, if China gets to have the cake and eat it, and they get to tell other people what to do, then maybe that shouldn't be the case. And if places like the United Nations are in support, but then they're just playing to the party line of the CCP, then maybe we shouldn't play ball with these people, even if by name they're supposed to set up to help everybody, but they're not. They're just pushing the ideals of another country or another political party. Then we're not going to play along with them, which I think is fair enough. You're not going to try and work with someone who is actively trying to destroy you. Similarly with Bill Gates coming out and saying, oh, it's terrible, the World Health Organization is great, seeing as he's the biggest individual funder, providing just under 10%. And then you've got the UK, and then you've got China. He's saying, oh yeah, well, we need more funding for the World Health Organization. Meanwhile, of course, he's saying with all his talks, essentially, well, we need depopulation. So I'm not entirely sure what his motives are there, but they seem arguably nefarious. So definitely take that with a pinch of salt. So with all that being said, as Trump is saying, well, China has been terrible in the whole way that they've handled the crisis. If they made it themselves, then it's murder. And if they haven't made it but just didn't help other countries, then it's manslaughter. Countries having to take precautions themselves before the World Health Organization could actually say anything. Similar with Taiwan saying, not only we know how to control it, but also we've got human-to-human transmission. You might want to take a look at this. China said that's not true. So the World Health Organization said, no, that's not true, despite the evidence suggesting otherwise, until China eventually said, yes, we've got human-to-human transmission. So the World Health Organization said, yes, okay, we've got human-to-human transmission. And the best thing is that when they said, okay, so yeah, we might have had a slightly slower response in order to tell people to stop by a few days. In that case, it didn't really make any difference. Meanwhile, if you've got places like California compared to New York, where the death and infection toll officially is incredibly different, and because California had its movement stopped just 2 or 3 days earlier than New York, they're saying, oh, well, it's because of those days, and that's what makes the difference. In which case, those few days, according to the World Health Organization, of being too slow to tell people to close down travel, then yes, those numbers do make a difference. So you tell me, or is it not really that bad? Because once, of course, we get into antibody testing, as I said before, in Germany and Goethe, I believe it is, that their mortality rate seems to drop to 0.37%. And there are various different studies in different places on different people showing that actually once we have antibody testing, we can see that a surprisingly large amount of people have already had it. And even if that's just in the single percents, that still throws off the mortality rate and the infection rate. It can be by up to dozens of times, even just being a single percent antibody confirmation. And at that point, it does show that this whole thing has been a complete overreaction, because we're assuming at the moment that there aren't any antibodies. Everybody who's had it has been tested, but of course we know that that's blatantly not true. So we're all looking for more antibody testing to be done in order to get a better idea of how many people have actually been infected. Therefore, we can have a better idea of how infectious it is, and of course how deadly it is. So, with all that being said, Trump is saying that he's going to look into it, and he isn't actually cutting funding yet. He might decide after this that, hey, it's time to stop the funding, or it might be time to continue it, of course. BBC is too biased and mentions the Wall Street Journal to really help what's going on there. But that's the main thing. It is nice to see somebody who is actually standing up against an organization that was supposed to speak truth to power, but now just seems to be speaking the power and not the truth, to then find somebody else to say, well, actually, let's see what is going on and decide if we still want to do business with you. So there was good news, there's good news, and there's more good news. So until next time, have a good one.